Bartholomew Town is brought to you in part by the University of Rhode Island Online, Navigant Credit Union, the Audubon Society of Rhode Island, Newport Film, and Half Street Group.
Bartholomew Town.
Hey everybody, it's Bill Bartholomew. On this episode of Bartholomew Town, I speak with Michael Greco, who is a former Brown University police officer who is raising concerns about what he says are issues with protocol, policies, and procedures in the department. And he makes the allegation that through firsthand experience, Brown University's police department is skirting some of the traditional or typical oversight that police departments ordinarily have. So you'll hear Mr. Greco lay out his case today. Now, I did take a look at many documents and listen to a lot of audio that Mr. Greco provided before agreeing to do this podcast. And while the claims made herein are those exclusively of Mr. Greco, and they're not opinion or anything that we're sitting here at Bartholomew Town and telling you exactly what happened or anything of that sort, we did verify that at least those claims that are being made by Mr. Greco have some level of appreciable data behind them. In other words, we feel as though this is not something that's just being made up. We've reached out to Brown University on a couple of occasions. We're hoping to get some answers to some specific questions and even have somebody from the university on the podcast to explain their position on all of this and perhaps push back on any of the claims that have been made by Mr. Greco. So we want to have this conversation going, but we did decide to publish this episode simply because, number one, these are the opinions and experiences of former Officer Greco, but also because we believe, having reviewed the documentation, that those statements being made by Mr. Greco are truthful, at least to the extent that he's been able to provide those documents, inclusive of audio, that we've been able to observe and listen to, that we feel there's credibility to at least tell the story. But as always, we put it out there, and the words and opinions expressed herein are those of Mike Greco as he tells his story and offers his concerns here on the podcast.
Bartholomew Town.
My name is Michael Greco. I've got over 17 years at Brown's Police Department. I served as a police officer there. I was union vice president under two different union presidents. I have a background in cultural anthropology as well as some other unusual sort of academic pursuits. And I'm currently in a lawsuit with Brown regarding a series of unethical and unsafe decisions made by the department and some attempts that they made to intimidate me.
So why are we having this conversation today? What's important to you in terms of if you're in litigation and if you've got grievances, whatever it may be? Why take this to the general public?
Well, I'm here to warn the public about a loophole in the law that's being exploited by Brown University's police department, as well as potentially other university police departments in other states, depending on how those states' laws are structured. In Rhode Island, I believe only Brown can take advantage of these loopholes. And I'm also here to expose some of the dangers of allowing Brown's police department to continue to operate under the current legal structures. I'm hoping that by speaking out on this, I can encourage lawmakers to sort of take action and protect the Brown community as well as the larger Providence community from some of the risks posed by Brown's police department. I tried to change things from the inside for many years. Like I said, I was there for 17 years, and I did have union positions, and I often spoke up. But what I've realized is that I can't really change things from the inside. Brown likes things the way they are, and I think that if people knew what Brown's police really was, they'd be kind of outraged as to, how things work around there. Mm-hmm. By being here, I'm trying to fulfill that oath that I took, right? I'm supposed to protect a community, right? We take an oath when we become police officers to protect the community. We're supposed to protect Providence and the Brown community. And I don't really see another way to do that at this point.
I mean, this is heavy for sure. What is it that makes this problem uniquely you said that there's probably no other police department. Is it that they're a private institution and their police department is working for them and it's separate from, like, for example, URI police is it's a state institution. So is that part of the uniqueness here? I guess sort of draw and define the problem that you're raising here.
Sure. The fact is that functionally, Brown Police Department isn't really a police department at all. I mean, on paper, it's a police department. It has the legal rights of a police department, and they'll hide behind some accreditation certifications that they have, and they'll tout those around, but those seem more like a pay-to-play sort of thing than anything meaningful. The reality is, when you take a deep look at Brown's police department, what it actually does is not as much public safety or policing. You have to look at its priorities, and its priorities, its function, its real mission, not its stated mission. That department's sort of more hiding behind the mask of a Department of Public Safety. And if you look closely enough, what you see is that it's more like a part of a public relations wing for Brown. Its highest priorities have never been, at least not during my whole time there, have never been public safety. It's more been about how do we control the narrative around what's happening at Brown.
And basically, through this model that you're outlining, it's, you know, you can make the argument that, like, any institution wants to protect its image. Any institution wants to do whatever they can to uphold notions of safety or notions of having things under control. But what is it specifically that has created this dynamic that you say you've experienced firsthand? What does this actually look like from the inside that has led you to think or experience or believe or want to talk about this issue?
Sure. The whole purpose of Brown having a police department is to create sort of an alternative legal system. Brown as an institution seems to see itself as something sort of separate from the local community. And while I think it's nice that Brown students and alumni have a sense of belonging in the community, around graduation time every year, the speeches come out and President Paxton starts referring to the community as Brunonia, like it's a separate country or something. And I think it's great that they have that to bond over. The problem is that I think the higher administration has really created a separate legal structure. You know, the officers will refer to this as the Brown bubble. And within the Brown bubble, what Brown says goes regardless of intent of the law, regardless of the concerns brought up by officers. Functionally, what it looks like is sort of the regular police are kept off the campus in a way.
Regular, like Providence Police or State Police or something like this?
Exactly, gotcha. Right? So they're kept off in a way because, you know, the Brown community is going to call the Brown University Police, or if 911 gets called, it now contacts the Brown University Police. Mm-hmm. And so they get there first, and so the other police departments don't come unless they're called. And Brown generally tries to keep them away. And so this means that the police reports are generated by Brown University. Now, at our department, the administration has the ability to edit reports without really keeping track of what edits take place.
And when you say administration, you mean police department or public safety department administration, or are you talking about President Paxton's office?
Well, the people who are going to make those edits are going to answer to President Paxton's office for sure. And the people who can make those edits are often the non-union people, so they don't have the protections over their jobs. So what I've seen is that it seems like the people who are higher up in Brown's administration really don't have much of a choice as far as how they speak and what they put in there. And so by having them edit the reports, now in a regular police department, what usually happens is a report would be kicked back to the officer for them to make the edits because it's a legal document. And so if you had to testify in court on a legal document, you need to be able to say it's your words. At Brown University, that's not the case. And so, there's all sorts of software out where when you make an edit, if I'm sharing a document with you, I can see what you did, and that's tracked. But in Brown's system, that's not the case. So these edits take place, and Brown has complete control over that narrative. In addition, one of the big problems is that all these officers, right, they're going to answer to those sort of same authorities. So there's pressure to put certain things in the report or not put certain things in the report. And the larger problem is that Brown isn't subject to any of these freedom of information laws. So a regular police department is going to be subject to freedom of information laws. The press can sort of do some sort of an audit. They can actually investigate what's going on there. They can look at the reports. They can find contradictions. They can go out and say, okay, well, this says this happened, whatever. But by Brown having its own police department there first and being a private institution, they can sort of cover all of that sort of stuff up and keep the press away. Right. That's not the case for Rhode Island College, University of Rhode Island, CCRI, because those answer to the state. Those are state institutions. Strangely, what has happened at Brown is it's this loophole where the normal checks and balances that would be on a police department don't apply to Brown. They apply to everything else in Rhode Island, but all the other police departments and law enforcement, but they don't apply to Brown. And some of the universities have a security department.
Right.
But if it's security, you're not giving the impression that you're law enforcement. And so if people want police or need police for some reason, they're going to call the actual police. And those security departments have to answer to the local law enforcement. In Brown's case, they are the local law enforcement, and yet they don't have any of the checks and balances in place that would usually be applied to local law enforcement.
So Brown's police department has jurisdiction on campus, obviously. What about places that are like city streets, like let's say Thayer Street or something like this, that if they conduct, a traffic stop is being conducted, Providence could conduct that traffic stop, but so too could Brown?
Yeah, so the law is written that they have jurisdiction over any streets that go immediately adjacent to the campus. And with an open campus, that has left the question for many years, and we actually had at some point gone to the Attorney General's office and tried to figure this out. The question had always been, where is that jurisdiction? Mm-hmm. When you say that a street runs immediately adjacent to Brown's property, does that mean that they have jurisdiction down that entire street because they have one building on the street? Or does it mean that they only have jurisdiction on the particular section of street directly in front of that building? And the answer we got was nobody knows. So now you're asking police officers to not know it. They don't know their own jurisdiction. They've gotten no clear definition of their jurisdiction, but they're supposed to act accordingly. Even when they ask, they don't get to find out.
I recall years ago an incident in Charlestown, Rhode Island, where the Narragansett Tribal Police had begun conducting traffic stops on Route 2, which is adjacent to the tribal lands, and there was a dispute between the Charlestown Police and the Tribal Police as to jurisdiction. And I don't recall if there was ever a resolution there. You would think that the state, in some way, shape, or form, would define the parameters of jurisdiction with specificity, 100 yards from an egress of a building or something like this. You're saying no such definition exists, and so you're in this environment. Everything you just outlined, that jurisdiction applies, and this loophole applies in a way that is also kind of gray area.
Everything there is gray. The whole thing is just gray areas, and I think that that's the way they like it, because it sort of becomes a game of doublespeak here and there, where you can interpret it one way or you can interpret it the other. When we asked the Attorney General's office for clarification on this was a very long time ago under a previous administration.
Gotcha.
And it was done through Brown's administration at the request of the union. So what actually happened in those conversations, I don't know. Mm-hmm. But I know that the response that was given back to the union was, we still don't know your jurisdiction, but go out there and do your job anyway.
So so you've painted this picture and have outlined some key The right word is loopholes, because this is a fascinating thing. You don't think about it. I mean, at full disclosure, I'm on Brown's campus and often with frequency and do programs there and things like this. And I've never once thought about this aspect of things. Brown police are, like you said, separate and different from security in that, one, they're vehicles, and you wear a police uniform, and it is a police badge, and it's a police department. Also, you carry you carry guns. Like you're cops by any layperson's definition, but you're also not subject to the same oversight, for lack of a better term, as most, if not all, other police departments in the state. That's essentially the picture that you've painted here.
Yeah. I mean, it seems almost as though Brown's police department has more rights to avoid scrutiny than any regular police department in the state. Mm-hmm. And so for some reason, it's funny because Brown University, we get trainings on fair and equitable policing. And in one of those trainings, I brought it up to the deputy chief. I said, what could be less fair and less equitable than the way we're doing policing here at Brown University? It sort of is like the legal repercussions of whatever's done is whatever serves Brown University, not whatever serves the public.
All right, let's get into what some specific examples that you've brought to us look like, sound like, and these are based, everything you're about to say here, let's just, for the sake of clarifying, these are things that you've experienced firsthand that you're sharing with us today. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. I mean, I think, primarily it's valuable to go into the actual incident that was sort of the straw that broke the camel's back for me.
Sure.
And then the way I was treated afterwards, and the intimidation that was in place. I have plenty of stories of things that I've witnessed, things that I've helped other officers with when I was a union rep. But I think this particular story I have the most experience with and is really driving this for me right now. And
I'll say for the audience that Bartholomew Town has reviewed numerous documents and pieces of audio that have essentially, as far as I know, I mean, I don't know exactly what you're about to say, of course, but what I anticipate you're about to say, we've reviewed these materials and, and it's clear that what you're about to outline is concerning at minimum.
Bartholomew Town.
Birds are disappearing from our landscape at a rapid pace. Over 1/3 of those breeding on Audubon Society of Rhode Island's wildlife refuges are in decline. Climate change has taken a toll on their migration, nesting, and food sources. While science is highlighting the problem, Audubon is working on real solutions with a plan to rapidly reduce their carbon emissions. The organization will be free of fossil fuels by 2030, with renewable energy powering Audubon's buildings, equipment, and vehicles. To shape our future, all of us must act. Learn more about repowering Audubon, their avian research, and how you can join their fight for climate resiliency. Visit asri.org/repower. Newport Film screens the latest, critically acclaimed documentary films year-round across Rhode Island. Like a film festival, Newport Film often gets early access to films before they're available online or in the theaters. Stay up to date on their latest screening events at newportfilm.com or on Instagram @NewportFilm. Are you looking to advance in your career or explore a new field? The University of Rhode Island now offers a comprehensive portfolio of fully online programs designed to bring world-class education to you anytime, anywhere. Choose from a wide range of flexible, asynchronous programs in business and leadership, data, tech and STEM, healthcare and pharmacy, marine and environmental science, and more. With expert faculty and innovative courses, you'll gain the skills and knowledge to thrive in today's competitive world. Are you ready to take the next step? Visit uri.edu/online and discover how URI Online can help you achieve your goals. URI Online, learn anywhere with us. Half Street Group brings a new generation's perspective to leadership communication, strategic public relations, and digital marketing. Half Street helps organizations and leaders take control of their own stories and manage their reputations. They get results for their clients by focusing on audience message and culture and by leveraging their decade-long relationship with media and opinion leaders in the Ocean State and throughout New England. Join me and Half Street Group founder and president Mike Rea for a conversation every month about news of the day, the hottest media analysis, and a look behind the scenes at how impactful leaders drive conversations. Learn more at halfstreetgroup.com. As Rhode Island's first ever member-owned credit union, Navigant Credit Union has been a staple in the local business community for more than 108 years. Today, Navigant is a $3.4 billion institution serving more than 136,000 members across 25 physical branch locations. But since its founding in 1915, the mission has never changed. Navigant Credit Union's team of financial professionals have remained committed to improving the financial well-being of the families, businesses, and communities they serve across Rhode Island. Learn more at navigantcu.org.
Yeah. The incident that started all of this put the lives of members of the Brown community at risk. It put Providence police officers at risk. It put Brown University police officers at risk. It put the Providence community at risk. And after the incident happened, when I raised concerns, they made attempts to intimidate me into being quiet. So, here's what happened.
Yeah.
So on November 7th of 2021, I responded to this incident along with a number of other officers. We get a phone call. We received phone calls and text messages on our cell phones, which was pretty unusual.
When you normally get radioed in these scenarios?
Yeah. So, right. I mean, you have standard procedures. It's a police department. Your radio goes off. They tell you where to go. You respond that way. But in this case, we were actually told we couldn't speak with Providence Police about it. We were told that a caller had stated that he had planted explosives around buildings in the main green. He had stated that he had an AR-15 assault rifle, and he said what building he was. He said we had 2 hours to act, and he said that he would shoot any police officers who moved towards that building if he saw them.
If any police approach me, I'm going to open fire on them immediately, and any other student that I see. The timer has started, ma'am. You have 2 hours. I'm disconnecting the call now.
We were told to meet in the back parking lot of the police station. And when we arrived, again, it was 3 patrol officers and a sergeant. You're looking at a Sunday afternoon, sort of early afternoon, a kind of quiet time of day. And when we get there, the 3 officers approach the supervisor, and the supervisor's on the phone with someone above him in rank. And so we approach him, and we say, hey, look, if this guy has an AR-15, we're the wrong people to deal with this. And that's not to say that the department, isn't trained police officers. They are. But that department carries pistols. And so an AR-15 is accurate and can be used at, 600 yards. And when a regular police department does their trainings with a pistol, you're looking at 20 yards is about where you're shooting from at the maximum. Mm-hmm. So the idea that we were supposed to approach and for some reason not tell Providence, and also for some reason not use our radios, was a bit disconcerting. The fact is that, Brown, like all police departments, has multiple channels. And if there was a concern about being monitored or something like that, the normal procedure would be to switch channels. But in this case, we were told we couldn't use our radios. And the only reason that I can see why that would be the case is that Providence monitors our radio traffic.
Providence Police.
Exactly. And like I said, it seems as though one of Brown Police's primary missions is to keep Providence Police off of the campus. And so that's the only thing that seems consistent to me as to why they would tell us not to use our radios. And in addition, one of the officers who was there was standing next to a Providence police officer when he got the call on his cell phone and was told he couldn't talk about it. So, I mean, it seems pretty clear that their motive was to keep Providence off the campus. So we respond to the station. On multiple times we approach our supervisor and we tell him, hey, we're the wrong people for this. We actually have a policy, and it's in the pile of papers that I showed you. Yep. We have a policy that out and out says that we don't do special operations because we're not qualified to do special operations. And so all of the officers who were involved had always been under the impression that in a situation like this, we would provide a support role to Providence's rifle team. That's what we thought we were there for in that case.
Right. The specialists or the tacticians would be from either Providence Police, the state police, whatever other law enforcement agency, and you would serve as a dispatch interface type of role, maybe an early response, but ultimately you would defer to the specialists who were equipped with the training and the actual weaponry and everything that goes into a rifle or response to tactical teams. That basically what the policy is, I understood it, is that. Yeah.
And I mean, in the case that there was an active shooter or something, we would respond immediately. But this person said we had 2 hours to act. We certainly took our time figuring out, or for them to plan what they were going to have us do. And yet Providence was not notified. Typically, our dispatchers would have been the ones who would notify Providence of concerns. The call log has none of these notifications made. And I'll get into it a little bit later on, but when Providence does end up showing up, the timeline doesn't quite make sense, and it wasn't the dispatchers. A non-recorded line called a non-recorded line, according to our administration. I'm wondering now whether or not it's just because at one point I did go over the air. Maybe that's why they showed up, but I'm not really sure. It's very strange that there's really no clear documentation as to how Providence was notified. Mm-hmm. So after repeatedly telling our supervisors that we were the wrong people for the job in this and that we'd play a support role, and we would have thought we would have been doing, say, getting crowds out of areas, things like that, right? But the response we get is, we're going to go flush them out. That's what I was told. We're going to go flush them out.
By who? Who told you that?
The supervisor, the direct line supervisor who was there would have been the highest ranking person on that particular Sunday afternoon. Mm-hmm. And he was on the phone with somebody else. He said it was his boss. I sometimes question whether his boss had someone else in the room from the administration giving him orders, because his boss was an experienced police officer who had retired from another department, had managed situations like this in the past, and I don't know any experienced police officer who had been in situations like that who would have made that call. So my assumption is that his orders were in some way compromised by Brown's administration. It was sort of the pressure to keep Providence Police off the campus, as is often the case. Wow. And so they asked us to line up on McGee Street. Now, McGee Street is directly outside the windows, the main windows of the building, this Rhode Island Hall, the building that this guy said he would shoot police officers from. So you could not have asked for a better and easier target than where they asked us to line up. And so there was a number of conversations. At some point, the officers did have a conversation about whether or not they were going to quit their jobs and go home.
During that response in that initial 2 hour window or whatever it is, you're there and people are in your colleagues are saying, "This is the last straw. I want to quit my job."
Yeah, no, the three of us had a conversation about how we were going to quit our jobs and go home. And I need to make it super, super clear, right? Because, the reputation of these officers is important. These people would never have said that if they thought they were risking their lives to save human life, right? And myself included. all of us sort of looked at each other. We had a conversation about it, and we said, hey, we're risking our lives for something else, and we're not even quite sure what it is, but we're not getting the support we need to survive this. And if this is not a hoax, the most likely scenario is we just die in the street here and we don't protect a single other person.
Jeez.
And so, this was very real to us. Now, at that time, one of the officers involved is in contact with dispatch, and he gets some incorrect information. And I think if he hadn't gotten that incorrect information, we would have actually just quit our jobs and gone home. And we would have just dealt with it later. But
what's that incorrect information?
The dispatcher mistakenly thought no one had entered that building that day. The dispatcher had access to a card access panel and misread it.
So the assumption was, all right, this is likely a hoax because there's nobody in there.
Exactly. And so now, while I think if it's real enough to send the police, it's real enough to give them the support they need to survive if it is if it's a real call. When she told us that the card access log showed no one had entered, we thought, okay, well, we'll go through this and then we'll argue afterwards, right? Because in the police community, the last thing you want is no one's going to hear you if you just appeared to be sort of cowardly in this or weren't willing to risk yourself for other people, right? I mean, sure. that's part of what you sign up for, is you're going to risk yourself for other people if need be. So when we had the conversation, we said, all right, well, this makes us believe it is more likely a hoax. Let's go do this. And when we got in the building, when we did clear the building, we actually did find an office worker in there. So the dispatcher's information was incorrect.
Yep.
And that office worker, thankfully that office worker was unharmed, right? Because you're coming in there sort of very, it's a high stress situation. You're coming in, you're looking, and when you see somebody when you didn't expect to, you're thinking, well, maybe this is the shooter. So that person's life was, somewhat put at risk as well. And what ends up happening is after we clear the building, and thank God it was a hoax.
Yeah, first and foremost, thankfully, this all boils down to something that wasn't a... But how do you know that? If you're responding to a call like this, I mean, how can you have... there should be no gray area, right?
Well, and that's the thing. That is, going back to what I was saying before, the way Brown's police department operates is entirely in the gray. And, as much as it can cause problems in the world of policing, that police officers find themselves often operating in the black and white, this idea that a police department can operate in the gray during an emergency response is just, it's downright dangerous. And so that's just not how, well, they kept it in the gray. And if this had been, because this caller had actually done this in other locations, and the caller had, as it turns out, they had a fair bit of experience. And one of the things that people who are active shooters do is they test things first. They look at responses. They may say they're doing one thing and then do something else. It's not like these are good people. So, just because there was some evidence pointing to the idea that it could be a hoax, if you're sending us, then you need to put us in a situation where we could survive if it's real. So after we clear the building, I go over the radio and I say that we cleared the building. And a friend of mine who happened to be in the command center at the time said that there was a big there were many sounds of complaints from management that I had gone over the radio. Now, we had stayed off the radio the whole time clearing this building with our response. We've been told not to use the radio, but I have to say, after we cleared the building, I thought that was something, I thought we could put it over the radio at that point. Apparently there was a big sigh and sort of aggravation. Now, my question And looking at the timeline, it seems possible as far as when Providence responded. My question is that when Providence got notified? When there was evidence over the radio that we had been involved in this thing, is that when it happened? I don't know that for sure. But something was very strange about when that call took place. And that's my first guess as far as, how that went down. So after that, we go and we start pulling fire alarms. That's our next set of instructions. And we're pulling fire alarms to get students out of some of these buildings where the person said they might have put explosives. But what ends up happening is crowds of students end up gathering in the main green. And again, I said, if someone is actively involved in this kind of thing, they may say they're in one place, but they're shooting from somewhere else.
Sure.
And so these students got put at risk. And then second shift comes in for work, and second shift is never told that there was a threat of a shooter or of shooting police. They're never told about it. They're just told, respond up to the main green and help those guys out. There was a bomb threat.
And you know this from talking to those second shift police officers?
Yeah. Well, they show up. The supervisors show up. They start talking, and we're telling them about it. And they're like, no one told us that.
Come on.
And then Providence police shows up, and it's the same thing.
They don't know.
They don't know either. They're just told there might be a bomb threat. All those officers walked right by the building the guy said he would shoot cops from. They all walked right by it. So, and they walked right down the center of the main green. They put themselves in all of the places that you wouldn't put yourself if you were concerned about a shooter, and they were never told. So when they get there, we start having those conversations. Now, when it's all said and done, this whole incident took place. So like I said, Providence police shows up, and they're just told that there were bomb threats. And so, there's false bomb threats all the time. And they do their thing. They check different buildings for bombs or whatever, and we clear a bunch of buildings. And, as it turns out, it was a hoax. A federal agency did catch the person who had made the call. They had made it to a number of universities. Brown refused to press charges on the person who did this. And despite all of the problems it caused. And again, kind of back to that theme that Brown doesn't want anything in the paper, So it's my report. It took place on my post, and so I'm supposed to write this report, and I go into the report writing room, and there's a lieutenant standing behind me in the report writing room, standing over me, looking down, and he is telling me, don't put any opinion in that report. And I'm like, don't put any opinion in that report. And he keeps repeating it. This is unusual. And, again, it's another one of these things. I'm like, this is really important to this person that I don't put opinion in this. I'm like, all right, well, I'm not going to put opinion, but they're not going to like the facts because it's my job to report what happened. And what happened was a mess. And if we don't report what happened, there's no way for us to fix it and address it in the future. And so I write my report. And at the conclusion of writing my narrative, I hit print and I go to some of the most experienced officers in the department. Some of these officers are retired from other departments. They've, written hundreds, thousands of reports. And they know the way things should be written, what's concerning, what would be, what you would try to leave out of a report as far as opinion goes. So I take it to some of these officers and I ask them, do you see any opinion in this narrative? Do you see any at all? And everyone says, no, there's no opinion in this narrative. So I'm like, all right, well, I've checked that box, but I've actually reported what happened. I leave and I had some scheduled time off after that. I come back from that time off, and when I return, I pull up the report. And the narrative that it says it's my narrative, everything that went wrong is deleted from my report.
So someone modified your report.
Someone modified my report, and it's still the way that system's set up. It still says it's my words. And the only evidence that someone could enter it, or that someone had entered it, was it puts a timestamp to say the last person to enter the report and their initials. But it doesn't, there's no record of what gets changed and how. And thankfully, I had hit print. And the reason I hit print was to show it to these other officers and say, okay, well, is there anything in here that's going to be an issue?
So you have, and we've observed, we being Bartholomew Town have observed a police report that appears one way with one set of facts that you outlined, and then a second police report that is different. So you basically printed your original report just out of happenstance to share it with somebody, not thinking that there was going to be some kind of modification that would then...
The idea that there was going to be a modification was a real possibility.
You knew that was a possibility.
I thought it, yeah. Well, to have the lieutenant standing over me, so concerned about what I had put in that report, to have so many strange things happen, the original reason for printing it was, I could have just brought the other officers over there and had them look at the screen. I did want evidence because it was not, when things don't look good for Brown in a police report, you kind of know they're going to try to change your report.
Gotcha.
And so they did. They changed my report. And at the time, I was still a union rep. Like I said, I served under 2 different union presidents as vice president. And I took that narrative and I went to the chief of police and I took both copies, right? So the copy of what I had written and then where everything had been deleted from my report that they had done wrong. And I brought it into the chief's office and I said, hey, that's a cover-up, chief. That's a real concern. That's a cover-up. And, sometimes people can ask you a question and there's only one right response. They know how to do it. And the chief did that, right? He said something along the lines of, well, you have 3 options. You could stay here and be angry. You could quit your job, or we could have a sit down and, have a conversation about what went wrong and try to get all on the same page.
So what did you choose?
Of course, right. You choose the sit down, right? Because you're trying to be a reasonable human being in a sort of unreasonable situation.
Yeah.
And so I choose that. So the phrase he used was debriefing. Now, a debriefing in police work usually would be after a critical incident of some sort, usually within 72 hours of the incident, to get everybody on the same page and help people process what happened. And so we were past the 72 hours when we had this conversation because of the time I had scheduled off. And he says that he wants to schedule this debriefing. He sends the email to an administrator to schedule it, and there's a response email talking about a separate debriefing that doesn't invite the officers who were involved. And I basically get uninvited from my own debriefing within minutes of being granted the debriefing.
That seems, is that an unusual practice by your previous experience, or what would typically happen in police
it's funny
debriefing?
the other phrase that you hear, one of the phrases you hear thrown around in the police department is something like secret squirrel. So sometimes management at Brown, when they're going to sort of try to keep information from officers or something, will refer to it as it's a secret squirrel meeting. And so this was just one more of these sort of secret squirrel meetings. It's really unusual. In a regular police department, the repercussions of what you do, right? So like you have an interaction and with someone who has done something wrong. At Brown, sometimes there could be an arrest, usually not. But if it goes sort of that academic route, now it's very, very private. So now the officer doesn't even know what happened to the student. Like I had one student, the student had dinner at the president of the university's house, not the current president, the one before. Mm-hmm. And earlier that night at 3 a.m, he is very intoxicated. He's screaming all this homophobic stuff. He's smashing all of his roommates' things, and he attacked me with a flat screen TV, right? It's like a smashed flat screen TV. He lifts it up and like tries to smash it over my head. And, I'm discouraged from making any sort of an arrest. Okay, fine. But I never even get to find out what happens to this kid.
Yeah.
Even though he attacked me. I don't know if there's any repercussions at all, So anyway, they have their secret squirrel meeting. And that's it. I don't hear anything. There's no debriefing after that, right? So this is early to mid-November when we have that conversation.
2021?
This is 2021, yeah. So we have that conversation, and there's no follow-up. There's no debriefing for me. They must have had their own separate debriefing with none of the involved officers. They invited members of Brown Police's management to it who were not part of any of the response. I think it was more like, how do we cover this up? How do we shut this guy up? And so they must have just hoped I would go away. So I didn't run for union vice president after that. I was thinking, well, gee, I should probably reevaluate my life and my career here. And so my last day of that term would have been New Year's Eve. My term sort of expired as New Year's on New Year's Day. And so on New Year's Eve, I wrote a long email to the chief of police, sort of documenting a lot of the concerns that I'm voicing here on Bartholomew Town. Specific incidences over a long period of time in which I said that I felt that the Brown community would be safer without the Department of Public Safety than having the department running the way that it was.
And you say that because in that scenario, hypothetically, the response immediately goes to Providence Police.
Exactly. And so the motivations of Providence Police have to be related to public safety. And so with Brown having a primary mission of public relations above public safety, you know, that those two things come into conflict. And what ends up happening in a situation like this is people's lives are put at risk because what's being prioritized is Brown's image over the safety of that community.
Yeah. And you've seen a pattern of this type of stuff, not just this one incident. So that's why you're able to stand here and make this case today.
Yeah. No, I mean, that it's in the 17 plus years that I was there, that is how they operate. And that doesn't mean that they never do public safety work.
Sure, of course.
It's just in their sort of hierarchy of priorities, it's just nowhere near the top. You know, what matters is how do we use a police department to control the story and the narrative and the information about and the image about Brown University. And that's the primary mission of the department. You know, I think a lot of people at Brown in the police department will wonder sort of like, what exactly are we doing here? Because again, it's sort of this doublespeak. You're told you have one mission, but when you act according to that mission, your administration is not particularly thrilled about it. Mm-hmm. You know, I know one situation where someone got a letter of commendation in their file for covering up a drunk driving accident. This is a positive thing. If they had done what they were trained to do by the Rhode Island Municipal Police Academy, I'm sure that Brown wouldn't have felt so good about it.
What now?
Oh, so when I do write that email, I get a response that says, "Oh yeah, sorry that took so long." Right. So we're more than a month and a half past the incident. Standard debriefing 72 hours. Mm-hmm. They seem to have forgotten about it, and there's evidence that they had the debriefing without the officers who needed it. And they say, "Oh yeah, we forgot about it," and they schedule a Zoom debriefing during a time where one of the other officers is on a leave of absence and the other is on vacation or on days off.
Okay.
And they ask me, because of course I'm the one who's pushing, because I was the union rep at the time. And so they scheduled this Zoom debriefing, and you can hear some of the recordings of that debriefing. They schedule that debriefing, and the debriefing seems to be the purpose of it seems to be more about intimidating me and letting me know that they could fire me. It's a very defensive sort of meeting. And at 17 minutes in, the captain who's running the meeting threatens my job multiple times. Now, that's about the time where I had said we were not willing to go into the building because the orders were suicidal. But I tell him that the three officers were discussing quitting their job and going home rather than following these orders that made no sense. And he says, "Well, you couldn't have quit your job because we would have fired you." Which, I mean, sounds like the bad guy in a movie, sure. Like the bad boss in a movie or something. But he says it, I think, 3 times in that recording in a row. And I end up having to sort of clarify over and over again. Anyway, it's a lot of threatening my job at that point. And that's when I started to have trouble. I was having trouble before that, but then as I realized that not only had they willingly risked my life for what I considered a lower level issue, keeping Providence police off the campus, but then that they were willing to kind of stand behind it and keep coming at me like that, I started to get a little bit shook. So I reached out to Brown's Wellness, right? And, the sort of the old way that police officers did things, you didn't do things like this. But, nowadays there's you're carrying a weapon, you're making fast decisions. And so I think most police officers now are willing to sort of seek help. And I was having a hard time sleeping is what it came down to. I would wake up in the middle of the night, pretty angry about the way I had been treated. And so the lack of sleep was getting to me. And so I reached out through Brown's Wellness. They had a wellness, sort of like a dispatch center for employees. And I reached out to them looking for some sort of help. And they introduced me to a counselor. And it's an outside agency that they use. So they introduced me to this counselor, and I tell the story to the counselor. And the counselor's like, you have PTSD.
Mm-hmm. What was that like to hear when you heard those words or that acronym?
Yeah, it is what it is. Mm-hmm. I don't have a problem responding to an emergency. I don't think that's an issue for me. What we realized is that I am triggered by the idea of following orders at this point. That sort of I had been violated on so many occasions that I had lost trust in the ability of anyone to give me any orders, which as a police officer, being able to follow orders is a really important part of your job. And I just had no trust at all. I have no trust at all at this point regarding that kind of stuff. And so that was, I had a couple of nightmares, more than a couple of nightmares, that sort of demonstrated my lack of trust. But what you don't want is all the stigma. As a police officer, the last thing you want is for the people who work with you to question your ability to sort of back them up if things go wrong. The one thing that you stand on is your ability to say, okay, I can provide safety for others and myself. And so when other people hear that phrase PTSD, that's always my concern, is that they're going to hear, oh, this guy's not dependable. Mm-hmm. But what it really meant is I was so enraged and had lost so much trust that I was afraid it was going to compromise my ability to make decisions quickly and to follow orders.
Yeah.
That being said, it's completely rational not to want to follow orders from a department that behaves that way. So we had a new deputy chief come in around that time, and I reached out to that new deputy chief to try to tell him the story, and he seemed pretty sympathetic. Actually, there was at some point someone has a recording of him in a training referring to what those orders as a suicide mission. So that was nice to hear. At least you had some sympathy there. But I ended up that clinician had basically told me to take a few months and get away from Brown. Mm-hmm. And so I did take that time and I filed TDI. But when I filed TDI, there was a box on the form for TDI and it said, is it work related? And it is work related.
Right. Sounds 100% work related in your case.
So I checked the box. Yeah. But by checking the box, I ended up in sort of a different stack of the bureaucracy, and so TDI didn't pay. And I couldn't get anyone on the phone, and I think they were going through a shortage or something like that at the time. But I was physically going down to TDI. They wouldn't let anyone in the building, and so I didn't get paid. I think I was out for something like 3 months, and I returned back to work. It's funny, the real breakthrough that made it so that I could go back to work was the clinician told me to take a sticky note and put the words "call PPD" on the sticky note. and just keep it with me.
Call Providence Police Department.
Call Providence Police Department, because we go through the same academy as any regular police officer. And what you're taught is they say there's the people who call the police and there's the police. And if you're the police, you don't have anyone else to call. So just deal with the problem. And that had stuck in my head so deeply that it hadn't occurred to me that if I thought Brown was risking the lives of their community and officers, I could just call Providence Police and deal with the repercussions later. So I went back to work, and the same captain who had threatened my job asks me how I'm doing, and I said I shouldn't be here. And he asked me what happened, and I tell him I didn't get paid, I had to come back. And he immediately, all of a sudden, Brown's HR department is very interested in all this. And no one was interested when I was writing all these emails before, but suddenly they're very interested because I told him that I had checked the box that said it was work-related and that was the reason. So I get a call from someone in Brown's HR, and it's very condescending, and it's very much putting pressure on me not to file workman's comp. And basically what she tells me, she says over and over and over again, she says, well, TDI is your money. TDI is your money. And Brown will defend itself. She keeps telling me in this call. And so her plan is, she tells me they have friends at TDI so they can get a direct line there, which later on she contradicts. And she basically says, I'm going to have you file for comp. We're going to immediately reject it. And then we'll call over to TDI and they'll pay you all your money.
Gotcha. So they just want to kick it over to the state.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that's what they do is they end up doing exactly that. They have an outside company that's supposed to manage that. When I start talking to the outside company about what I had been through, and telling them outright that Brown was discouraging me. I mean, she was basically telling me that if I filed comp, Brown would have access to my medical records. And I've observed them use the police department to get around HIPAA in the past, right? So that they'd have access to my medical records, and that in the courtroom, they're going to, mess up my life. Because we're talking about records with a clinician, right? So every terrible thing that I've talked to this clinician about that's ever happened in my life, now Brown's going to have access to it. That was basically what she was telling me. And so we go forward with their plan. I get paid by TDI, and I'm back to work for a while, and then a series of other sort of events take place that kind of trigger me back into having sort of exacerbating these issues over again.
Mm-hmm. And so that takes you to today. In sort of a executive summary, it takes you to today. But I mean, what would you say right now as you're having this conversation, and you're in the midst of this transformation in your own life, really? How would you describe? Or let me rephrase that. What is it that you want to tell the general public about your experience that they should know, and what are you hoping to get right now out of this?
One of the phrases that I heard on a number of occasions when I brought up ethical issues at Brown was my supervisor's supervisor would tell me, well, this isn't a police department, it's a Queen's Army. That's what I was told on multiple occasions, that it's a Queen's Army. And, there's good people who work there who want to protect the public. But unless we can change some of these freedom of information laws and make them so that they apply to Brown University's police department, it's always going to kind of be a Queen's Army. There's not going to be any checks and balances on the police department there. They have these different rights. And so It could be solved if they were a security department, or it could be solved if they had the same checks and balances put on them as any other department, any other law enforcement agency in the state. But this way that they run in that gray area, the way that they're able to do that without any freedom of information applying to them, it creates all these perverse incentives, and it puts a lot of people at risk. And the story I'm telling is just one of many stories in which this motivation to protect Brown's image and this loophole in the law has resulted in something that is dangerous to the public, and not only the officers, the Brown University community, alumni, students, and also the Providence community. I think lawmakers could do something about this. I'm really hopeful that somebody will.
Mike, thanks so much for having the courage to tell this story and raise this situation. Anything else you want to say?
No, I really appreciate you having me on the show and letting me share my story. And I'm just hopeful this gets in the right ears. And, I'm always willing to talk about the different issues that, some of the other stories that I've had. So, but thank you very much.
Hey, thanks for stopping by Bartholomew Town. For more content, follow me on Instagram @BillBartholomew.